Guests of honor, Mrs. Irene Pipes and Professor Richard Pipes, donors of the Roth Chair for Research on the History and Culture of Polish Jewry from the Middle Ages to the present, whose dedication we mark today. His Excellency Mr. Wiesław Kuceł, Deputy Head of the Embassy of the Polish Republic in Israel. Professor Moshe Kaveh, President of the Bar-Ilan University, Professor Chaim Teitelbaum, Rector of the University, Professor Yafa Zilberschatz, Assistant to the President, Mr. Matt Merilis, Director of the American Friends of Bar-Ilan University, Professor Gershon Bakon, the Head of the new chair, honored guests. It is a great honor for me and a great pleasure as well to open this ceremony for the dedication of the Marcell and Maria Roth Chair for Research on the History and Culture of Polish Jewry from the Middle Ages to the present day. This chair will work within the framework of the Jewish History Department, of which I have the honor to serve as chairman. Therefore, I wish to use this opportunity to present to you this department, its staff, and their achievements. This is the largest such department in Israel, if not in the entire world, in the field of Jewish history. The faculty members of the department are among the best by any criterion by comparison with other departments in other institutions. Thus, for example, in the department there are 3 winners of the Shazar Prize, 1 winner of the Ben Tzvi Prize, 1 winner of the National Jewish Book Award in the United States, 2 winners of the Koret Prize, 1 winner of the President Prize in Israel, 2 winners of the Hacht Prize, and many other prizes in Israel and abroad. Members of the department are regularly invited to prestigious research centers in North America and Europe. Similarly, faculty members are invited to lecture and teach in universities throughout the world. The academic productivity of the department faculty, particularly in the area of publishing books by prestigious academic presses in Israel and abroad, is notable both in quantity and in quality. Regarding 2 of our faculty members, leading scholars in their field, you will be hearing later on this afternoon. And now I ask Professor Moshe Kaveh, President of Bar-Ilan University, to offer some words of greeting.
Irene and Richard Pipes, and in the 20 minutes that I'm sitting near to you, Irene, the warm attitude you have to the Jewish history from Poland, that my wife and myself went through that history as a witness of that, and it's very warming. To preserve it is very difficult. Me as a president who raised millions of dollars for the university, it's sometimes easier to raise money to sciences, to faculties of medicine, for nanotechnology. When it comes to preserving culture, I mean, you need people special devoted to that. So I'm very grateful that our Department of Jewish History is fortunate to have someone so devoted like you. And the way you talk about it in a passionate way, it's extremely important. I myself went so many times to Poland, and I saw, I mean, fortune of culture, of books that cannot be brought to Israel. And it is there. All our connections, everyone who visited in Vilna, and the Gaon of Vilna, that is, we would like to have someone like him in our university. And it's extremely important. So the fact that you're going to preserve the Jewish culture is extremely important to university, that the logo of the university is basically, if you look at it, it's a microscope and the Torah, where it's written in the Bet and the Aleph together, which is a combination of science and our Jewish history, our Jewish beliefs. So adding to the Jewish culture is extremely important in general and so on. I'm sure many students will come and learn here, and it will be a continuation. And as you said, to give a book or to do anything which will not continue, it's not so. And again, I mean, you're an architect, and your husband, Professor Richard Pipes, is an historian in Russian history. I am a small part of it. I was born with my wife there, but it is the Jewish part, which is a small part of it. And again, we have to thank Russia that saved many Jews that escaped to Russia. So you're a couple which symbolizes what happened to Jews that survived during that period of time. I would like to say that I would like you to be guests of honors every time you come to Eretz Israel, to meet our students. And you should understand that to preserve culture needs investment, not only in money, in effort. And I think department like Jewish history, which is one of the best that I know around the world, can do it. And it's a good time of investment in both. And as I say, to invest in something before our festival of Chag HaShavuot, which is the origin of our Jewish culture that started there, and to integrate now in the University of Bar-Ilan something which maintain it, it's extremely important. And I understand there's no better way to commemorate your parents that are here in the picture, everyone can see it. And this is touching that we shall have a chair, Marcell and Maria Roth chair in history and culture of Polish Jewry from the Middle Ages to the present. And I know that you are so in touch. You already promoted a film that I should see, In Darkness, which I can say it loudly, which gives a period of time which was dark to our people. And so Irene, God bless you. And in order to ensure a Jewish future, we need to study our Jewish past and to make a continuation by that, by having so good people like you in the present. Thank you.
I am extremely privileged and honored to represent Embassy of the Republic of Poland at this festive luncheon dedicated for the inauguration of the chair in the history of the Polish Jewry and the culture of the Polish Jewry. First of all, I would like to express my deep appreciation and congratulations to the founders of the chair, dedicated to the memory of Marcell and Maria Roth, and for the study of the history of the Polish Jewry. I hope it will contribute to preserve and document the history and the culture of the Polish Jews that lived on the Polish soil for 1,000 years. Poland was home to the most significant and the largest Jewish community in the world. It was also the center for the Jewish cultural and political life, thanks to the long period of religious tolerance and social autonomy. Poland also faced a problem of anti-Semitism that was present throughout Europe in the first part of the 20th century and witnessed the unprecedented tragedy of the Holocaust with almost total destruction of the Jewish community by the Nazi Germany. And since the fall of communism, we have witnessed a revival of Jewish life in Poland, and we are very happy that we can say this, that in Poland now we have every year cultural events, new study programs are introduced in the Polish high schools and the universities, and we are going to inaugurate next year the Museum of the History of the Polish Jews. Poland of today is one of the best friends that Israel has in the international arena. And the relations between our countries are excellent. And the indication for this will be evident in the autumn when the second Polish-Israel intergovernmental meeting will be held in Warsaw, the preparation for which are now underway. And I'm happy to declare that we can maintain positive relations in view of the good memories of our past, while taking into account the memories of those things that were terrible. But I think that Poles and Jews can build a better future, one of hope, benefit, and understanding for both sides. And let me conclude with best wishes to the University of Bar-Ilan, and may the chair enjoy many achievements in the field of Polish Jewish research and academic excellence. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the faculty and staff and all friends of Bar-Ilan, we're proud to present this to you today on behalf of, as I say, all of us here, and also in honor of Mrs. Irene Pipes and Professor Richard Pipes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It is a great honor for me to serve as the first holder of the chair for the study of the history and culture of Polish Jews in memory of Marcell and Maria Roth here at Bar-Ilan University. The long history of Jews in Poland, their place in Polish society and culture, the complex relations between Poles and Jews will be some of the subjects that we plan to study as part of the activities of the chair. In recent decades, the study of Polish Jewry has become a truly international enterprise in which scholars from Poland, the rest of Europe, North America, and Israel participate. It is our hope that the activities of the Roth Chair will become an important force in this field of research. We have entitled our short panel discussion today, Polish Jewish History, New Tools, New Sources, New Contexts. On the face of it, this should not be surprising. After all, reevaluation is part and parcel of historical research. It is normal, even expected, for historians to revise the picture of the past, to correct details, to reinterpret issues and events in the light of new sources. But in the case of the historiography of Polish Jewry, the phenomenon goes way beyond the norm. Because over the past 3 decades, we are witness to a sea change and a complete transformation in the way that Polish Jewry is studied and written about. Who are we? And what is the calling card, as it were, of the present generation of historians of Polish Jewry, whether we are North American-born Sabras or those active in Poland today? One thing I can say is that many of us are the heirs of the generation of post-1968 exiles from Poland, who arrived both here and in Israel and in the United States, such as the late professors Yakov Goldberg and Lucjan Dobroszycki, among others, and Polish historians who made their way to the West in the wake of the 1968 events, including the dear teacher of both Professor Rostman and myself, Professor Andrzej Kamiński, who taught us at Columbia University. We owe these people a great debt. They have been our teachers who bequeathed to us their deep grounding in Polish sources, whether dealing with medieval or the modern period, and we owe them a debt for keeping alive some minimal level of Jewish historical research in the not always congenial atmosphere of communist Poland. The second thing about us is the exposure to Poland itself, whether sooner or later, depending on political circumstance and on the possibility of getting visas. But the exposure, the time spent in Poland, was clearly a formative experience for myself and many others, beginning with my first visit to Poland back in 1972. If I can wax biblical for a second, paraphrasing the beginning of the book of Exodus, we are the generation that knew not Poland, except perhaps to the stories that we may have heard from grandparents. But the Eastern Europe of the beginning of the century, the beginning of the 20th century, seemed very, very far away. And the politically charged aspects of Jewish life in interwar Poland that may have enlivened the historical enterprise also loaded upon it a political agenda within the fight over Polish Jewry's past and future. This was not part of our baggage, and it meant that we might consider alternative historical explanations that for our distinguished predecessors may have been politically or personally taboo. We are not committed to any a priori view of what Polish Jewry was supposed to be like. We feel free to call things as we see them, and we have no ideological issues at stake in forging the historical narrative. If I had to characterize the attitude of the present generation of historians, I would say that we don't and can't have nostalgia for Poland, but we do have empathy for Poland and for Polish Jewry. And further, if I may continue the biblical paraphrase for a moment, the generation of young historians in Poland itself who have begun to write on Jewish topics were a generation that knew not Jews. And this includes even those of Jewish origins themselves. But none of them had memories of a large, functioning Jewish community in Poland. What this means is that this ongoing international discussion of Polish Jewish historical research is being carried out by people who all had to gain their knowledge of that community from historical sources and not personal memory, for better or for worse. We don't have the ideological baggage of previous generations, but I don't delude myself into thinking that we have no baggage of our own. This is part of who we are. But what do we do that makes us different? And just as the old story goes about the veteran businessman saying to the young man starting out in business, there are 3 keys to business success: location, location, and location. I would say that the success for writing the history of Polish Jewry is based on context, context, and context. The whole school, if I can call it that, of the present generation of Polish Jewish historians, whether active in North America, Israel, Poland, or other countries in Europe, has made a contribution in 3 distinct contexts. The first, to make Jews part of Poland. Not just something separate, not just an object of governmental policy, but also an active force, part and parcel of the Polish landscape, as it were, that carries on a give and take with its surroundings, that has a policy or policies of its own. We make the Jews part of Poland also in the sense that we come to Polish Jewish history not just from within, but also with a grounding from the outset in Polish history or Russian history. If I may be permitted an observation on present-day events, the seemingly obvious observation of making Jews part of Poland is very much needed in an era when thousands of Israeli and diaspora Jewish youth make what is essentially a pilgrimage to the sites of destruction of Polish Jewry, with some visits to remnants of Polish Jewish culture, such as synagogues or cemeteries, but with little appreciation for Poland as a country, its history and culture, and the part of Jews in it. It is hoped that the new Museum of Polish Jewish History mentioned by the ambassador, soon to open in Warsaw, will offer a major corrective to this problem. The second context is to make Jewish history part of general history, utilizing the tools and approaches that are at the cutting edge of the historical discipline, whether it be literary theory, use of biography and autobiography, gender studies, and more. One of my own doctoral students, from whom we will hear in a few moments via a film, wrote on the Jewish family in interwar Poland and brought to bear on her work many of the approaches developed in family history, gender studies, and feminist research, to name just a few areas. The third context is the personal context, the self-awareness of the historian, very much aware of who he or she is, what his background may be, and how that may influence what we choose to write about. In a sense, it's history as autobiography. We realize that we cannot fully achieve what the late Peter Novick called the noble dream of objective history. This doesn't mean that we give up on positivist history writing, just know its limitations. We are keenly aware of the difference between history and memory and try to make fruitful use of the differences and tensions between the two. In his fascinating memoir entitled Vixie, Memoirs of a Non-Belonger, our honored guest, Professor Richard Pipes, writes about his return to Poland and to Warsaw after an absence of many, many years. And he writes, "My dejection was due primarily to the fact that the city, which had once been home to 300,000 Jews, was now Judenrein. I had known this fact, of course, but abstractly. The reality of it was brought home to me as I searched in vain for Jewish faces on the streets. It was all unspeakably depressing. Observing these scenes, I had the eerie feeling that I was the last Jew on earth. What especially bothered me then, and on my subsequent visits to Poland, is that the presence of Jews in the territory of Poland simply vanished from the consciousness of the Polish people. True, an occasional book recalled Jewish life in Poland, but it hardly left any trace in the nation's collective memory. And this despite the fact that Jews had lived in Poland for 7 centuries, during which they had made significant contributions to the country's economy and, in more recent times, its culture. It was as if they had never existed." Like her husband, our other honored guest today, Mrs. Irene Pipes, has certainly taken this painful observation to heart. Through the American Foundation for Polish Jewish Studies, which she has long served as president, Irene Pipes has fostered scholarly research and helped to keep alive the history and memory of the Polish Jewish masses missing from the streets of Warsaw and other Polish cities and towns. Most notable in this respect is her long-standing support of the publication of Polin, the flagship journal of Polish Jewish Studies, on whose pages, over the last decades, there developed the international dialogue of which I have spoken today. With the establishment of the Roth Chair, Mrs. Pipes' involvement in the furthering of Polish Jewish studies has entered a new and expanded phase. The life of Polish Jewry was a complex dialogue over centuries between Jews and Poles, but a no less complex relationship among Polish Jews themselves. A debate and oftentimes a dialogue of the deaf carried out in Polish, Yiddish, and Hebrew. We see it as our research task to investigate those varied voices and bring them back to life. Your generous gift to the university will give us the wherewithal to carry out more effectively our task of training a new generation of students and researchers, and to further the development of Polish Jewish studies as a whole. Being named the first incumbent of the Roth Chair is a great honor and a humbling responsibility, and I offer up my sincerest thanks to you both. Thank you.
Professor Bacon was talking about context and sources, and I wanted to share with you some experiences of getting to the new sources in order to create the context. The first time I did research in Poland was in 1978. Poland was still very strongly communist, and while it seems difficult to imagine today, with the internet and all of the communication we have, in those days, it was impossible to see in advance the catalog of any archive. You only knew what was in the archive by word of mouth. So when I went to Poland to research relations between the Jews and the Polish high nobility, it was really on a bet that the material I would need was really in the archive that I went to, which was the Czartoryski Library in Krakow. My first day in the archive, and I should say there's a rule that you follow when you do archival research. You never go into an archive just looking, because if you're just looking, you won't find anything. But if you're looking for something, you will find many things. So I was looking for something, and that is Jews and magnates. But the first day, I finally got to see the catalog, which was only a typed book on onion skin paper, of which there were 2 copies. And I realized that the Czartoryski family that owned this archive had also owned Mezhibuzh, the town where the Baal Shem Tov lived. Well, if the records of Mezhibuzh are in this archive for the 18th century, and if the Baal Shem Tov really lived, and if he was important, you would expect to find a mention of him in the archive. And until then, there had been no non-Jewish sources about the Baal Shem Tov. So it seemed pretty simple. But I was afraid. And I didn't order the files. Because what if he wasn't there? Or worse, what if he was there, but he wasn't quite the Baal Shem Tov that we expected? So I went about my main mission, but of course I knew the files were there. And finally, my Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, overcame me. And about 6 weeks after I arrived, I ordered the files. And in 15 minutes, I found the Baal Shem Tov's tax records. And what was important about that was that he didn't pay tax. He lived in a house rent-free and tax-free, which meant that rather than being a rebel against the community, as he was often portrayed, a rebel against the establishment, he was part of the establishment. He was supported by the establishment. And here's where the new context comes in. Knowing this sheds a completely different light on the Hebrew material, on the Jewish sources. And that led to a book. So that's one example. Another example, in the autobiography of famous Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Megillat Sefer, he talks about his father, who was the Chacham Tzvi Ashkenazi, who had been the rabbi of Amsterdam, and as a result of a Sabbatean controversy in Amsterdam, he had to leave, and he didn't have a job. He wandered around for a while, and finally, Yaakov Emden says that he got to Poland, and a rich Maecenas in Poland took him under his wing and let him and supported him for 4 years. And this rich Jew's name was Yaakov Ritvin, that is Yaakov of Ritviani. Excuse me, not Yaakov, Yisrael Ritvin. And he's described by Emden as the econom, or the manager, of the estates of the Shinyavsky family. Well, I found 400 letters dictated or written by Mr. Yisrael Ritvin, whose name on the letters is Yisrael Rubinovich, the son Ben Ruvain, so that we understand how it is that he had the resources to be able to support the rabbi, and of course what it meant to be an econom, a Jewish econom, for this great estate. So we took the Jewish source and merged it with the Polish sources, and we learned something about both Jewish history and Polish history. But sometimes what's important is what you don't publish. On another occasion, I found a document that was an assurity, a security. 3 people guaranteed that somebody would show up in court. And one of the 3 people who signed was Yisrael ben Eliezer in Mezhibuzh. Well, Yisrael ben Eliezer is the Baal Shem Tov's name. So, first thing I think, well, I have the Baal Shem Tov's signature, Yisrael ben Eliezer in Mezhibuzh. But something bothered me. The date. The date was 1731. From the Jewish sources that we have, it seems that the Baal Shem Tov arrived in Mezhibuzh around 1740. Are the Jewish sources wrong? Did they not give us all the information? And when I mentioned this to a few of my friends, they said, oh, you've got to publish it. This is the Baal Shem Tov's signature, Yisrael ben Eliezer and Mejibush. But it bothered me. So I didn't do anything. Until a few years later, when I went back to the archive, and I started digging in to these documents, and I discovered that in 1731 there was another Yisrael ben Eliezer who was called Nemerzhinsky, that is originally from Nemirov. So I was glad I didn't publish it. And one final anecdote, and that has to do with teaching, because in creating new knowledge, it's important not only to go into the archives and study documents, but it's also important to communicate what it is that you learn. And what you often find is that the reactions of the students put what you've learned in a different light and stimulate you to go in certain directions. And once, I happened to be on sabbatical at the University of Michigan, and I was teaching a course on Polish Jewish history. And the subject of the day was Jewish economic life in the 17th and 18th centuries. So I talked about Jewish economic life, and a student, I remember her name, Michelle Misagia, raised her hand. She said, what does all this have to do with women? Didn't women have some kind of economic life? Didn't they do economic things? And on the spot, I started talking about women in the Polish Jewish economy in the early modern period for about 20 minutes. And I realized this is a subject. And unlike what people often think, that there are no sources dealing with women, that women weren't active in the public sphere, once you ask the question, you see that there are sources. You see the existing sources in a different light. And this started me on a quest, which I hope to end soon, with a book about the lives of Jewish women in Poland. Thank you.
My name is Adva Zeltzer, and I had the privilege to write my PhD dissertation under the guidance of a wonderful person and scholar, Professor Gershon Bacon. The subject I chose to my dissertation was the experience of growing up as a Jew in interwar Poland. I tried to penetrate the inner and emotional lives of this generation, and by that to add what I believe a fundamental layer to our understanding of Jewish life during this period. For these sorts of questions, I needed to find sources that will enable me to penetrate their inner thoughts and feelings. Fortunately, Ivo Institute made all the arrangements for me by initiating 3 youth autobiography competitions during the 30s. Around 370 autobiographies survived Second World War, affording a rich and rewarding source for these sorts of research. Now I was able to depict in very high resolution their daily routine, from the most trivial actions through new opportunities opening up for them and obstacles which stood in the way. I learned about the typical life course of boys and girls from their early childhood until the day they sat down to construct their past. But more than that, I was able to chart an emotional map of their experience and understand common emotions, influential and inspiring elements in their lives. And by that, new functions are added to the institutes and activities that characterize their life. And in this collective biography, I answered many questions that the research usually neglects. What kind of dilemmas and conflicts were they facing? What scared or disappointed them? And what made them happy and excited? How they individually and collectively dealt with the gap open between their dreams and hope and the frequently disappointing reality. What kind of meaning they found in their lives, and how their emotional experience evolved into an historical agent and a driving force which left their marks on the world of interwar Polish Jews. That's it for now. Good luck with the new chair. I'm sure that with Professor Bacon and of course with Professor Moshe Rossman, it will soon become one of the leading research centers of Polish Jewry.
I wrote a family chronicle some time ago, and I will read some parts from it related to my parents. Marcell's official life as a bachelor ended with a visit to the jewelry store across the street from my grandparents' house, which belonged to their friends in Warsaw. He went there one day to buy some jewel. I never heard or found out who the jewel was for, but he did not notice a young, beautiful girl sitting below counter level. My future mother, who graduated in 1922 from high school, was 18 years old, 5'7" tall, considered very tall at the time, with long, wavy blonde hair and blue eyes. A close friend of my mother's, who attended the same school, recollects that Marysia Pajewska, as she was called in school, played the piano every morning for the assembly to accompany the singing of a song to God that was accepted to all religious, Kiedy ranne wstają zorze. From where my future mother sat, she only noticed his hands and fell in love with them. When the owner of those hands came back on the wintry day of 1922 to pick up the jewel, she persuaded the store owners to introduce her to him. My future father, Marcell Roth, was 32 years old, 5'10" tall, had reddish-brown wavy hair, and an athletic figure. They had a brief courtship. It was love at first sight, even though they had no common language, for Marcell spoke German and Yiddish, and she Polish and Russian. In spite of this difficulty, for they soon learned each other's languages, they were married on May 3rd, 1923. A national holiday celebrating the Polish Constitution in the apartment of her parents on Bagno 2 by Rabbi Samuel Poznański. The wedding was small and modest, for her parents were proud and would only do what they could afford, which was little at that time. She was not quite 19 and he 32. This was considered the right difference of age if a man was to support his wife in the style that he did. For their honeymoon, they first went to Vienna to meet the Roth in-laws, the brothers and sisters. Among them, the oldest was Wilhelm, who would play a major role in our future life. On the return to Warsaw, my mother moved to Marcell's bachelor's quarters, did not agree with the housekeeper who was set in her ways and used to running the house. The bride thought she knew better, and after a time managed to convince her husband to fire the lady. It was in those years that both Wilhelm and my father started buying properties in Poland, Austria, and Germany. Their first house was in Warsaw on Żurawia 23, where the newlyweds moved and I was born. The building was of brick, built to last 5 stories high, with balconies and a courtyard in the center of which a cupid spouted water. It was blown up by the Germans in 1944. Both brothers worked for the German firm of IG Farben and resigned when Hitler came to power and started their own chemical firm. My father traveled extensively on business, but found time for sports that he loved. He managed most days either to swim in the Vistula River, even in the winter when it was frozen, or to go horseback riding early in the morning. He owned and kept a horse in a stable outside of Warsaw. My mother's life was quite different. She worked as a volunteer in the Korczak orphanage, for it was always short of money and needed help with the orphans. My mother administered all the properties, kept the books, and collected the rents, making sure that all was in good order. She met friends in cafes and restaurants where they danced, gossiped, and played bridge. She traveled a lot with or without her husband, for he could not get away as much as she could. They did a lot of entertaining at home. Even though my room was a distance from it, I could hear the noisy laughter. I will never forget the nights my parents would come to our room to say good night before going to a ball, concert, or dinner. They were often in evening dress, mother in a beautiful gown that she either brought from Vienna or had made by the dressmaker, or fabrics or designs imported from France or Italy. My father would be in tails with a black fur-lined coat called pelissa and a silk top hat. After the Anschluss of Austria in 1938 by the Germans, my parents realized the danger of being Jewish in Poland. But it was only after the German occupation of Czechoslovakia that they started seriously thinking of leaving Poland. They made 3 trips to England to see how they could arrange their life there, but returned unimpressed. It was hard to make a decision, for there were restrictions for taking money out of the country. Since the brothers owned everything jointly, some funds were placed abroad. The arrival of Polish Jews from Germany showed how serious the situation was. My father gave free a house in Yarosław to a large family. They lived there when the Germans invaded Poland, and I can only guess what their fate was. The sound of bombing and air raid sirens woke us up on the morning of September 1st. Hitler in his speeches announced the invasion of Poland while his troops were already occupying southern Poland. The blackout went into effect, and it was dangerous to walk in town. On the second day, 2 Polish policemen came to arrest my father. Here I would like to explain why we had German passports. When the Roth family lived in Busk, which now is the Ukraine, before the end of World War I, it was the part of Poland occupied by the Austrians. When Poland gained its independence in 1918, all inhabitants of Galicia had a choice of becoming Polish citizens or remaining Austrian. My family had close ties with Vienna, spoke German, and it seemed like the right decision to remain Austrian. After the German annexed Austria in 1938, everyone Austrian became a German citizen. And the Jews among them had a large letter J for Jude stamped on the front page of the passport. My mother, after her marriage, and later Hannah and I, that's my sister, were automatically German citizens. I was not aware of this until my father's arrest. When they tried to change it to a Polish one, it was no longer possible. At the time of my father's arrest, the Polish authorities did not distinguish between Germans and German Jews. It took my mother 3 days to find out where her husband was taken and to collect enough gasoline for us to be able to leave Warsaw, which we did on September 6, 1939. She discovered that he was taken to the only concentration camp in Poland, Bereza Kartuska. The prisoners could be sent there without court sentence for 3 months. In the late evening of September 6th, we took our last look at our grandparents who refused to leave, for they thought they had survived the First World War and they would survive this one. We did not know that we would never see them or our house again. We drove in total darkness. People were leaving on horse-drawn wagons, bicycles, motorcycles, and on foot. Among those escaping were motorized army vehicles with officers going east. The army was in flight. We heard rumors that the Bereza Kartuska was blown up, but we kept on driving, hoping to find father. Mother and her brother changed places driving, but we never stopped. At one point, planes were flying above us. We jumped out of the car and some distance lay down on the bare ground, which shook under our bodies. We knew the Germans liked to bomb cars, and one of the pilots took a good look at us. When we approached the prison and parked the car in nearby wood, my mother gave her brother a small bundle with some food and a sweater. She realized once he had left what danger she exposed him to. He did come back and reported that the guard took the package and promised to give it to the prisoner, Marcell Roth. We kept on driving with few stops until we met the Russian army on September 17 in a small town. They were Soviet soldiers, young boys, who thought they were going to take Berlin. On strict orders, they confiscated our car and gave us a receipt on a scrap of newspaper and told us we could claim it after the war. We still tried to get as far as possible from the approaching German army. There were no train or bus schedules. One just sat at the train station and waited. We managed to get on a freight train and eventually got to Vilno. Wherever possible, we mentioned to who would listen that we met, if they met, a Mr. Roth to tell him his family is in Vilno. On October 14, 1939, Father walked in carrying a pot with tulips. He looked terrible. His head was shaven, he was thin and worn out since he walked all the way from the prison. He was wearing the sweater that was delivered to the prison. It took time for him to tell us the horrors that he went through. October 28 was our lucky day. The Russians decided to return, in quotes, Vilno to Lithuania, and overnight we were in a free country. Father could get in touch with the outside world and found out that his brother Wilhelm, who was by then in New York, had all the documents ready for us to leave. We had immigration papers to Canada, for he thought life would be much more familiar, more European than in the US, and steamship tickets. On January 17, 1940, we flew to Stockholm and boarded the SS Drottningholm in Gothenburg, and 10 days later admired the Statue of Liberty and the green roofs of Ellis Island, where we found ourselves over the weekend while our papers were being checked, for it was a Friday and the banks were closed. This was our first encounter with the United States. The policeman who watched us entering the dining room, this is in Ellis Island, asked if we would like kosher or non-kosher food. We soon left for Montreal, where we stayed for a little over a year, but learned enough English to first finish high school. We then emigrated to the US, for the Canadian authorities wanted us to start a farm, not the kind of business my parents were prepared to do. It took some time to recover the blocked funds. My parents led a pleasant life in New York for nearly 40 years. They had many friends and acquaintances from Poland with whom they shared a similar lifestyle. My father tried to do some business but was not very successful at it. He could not get used to the American way of doing business. His old-fashioned, old-world ways did not work. He lost out when trusting on a handshake and not making sure it was all signed and sealed. After a few more attempts, he was of retirement age and concentrated on his investments working at home. He died in 1978, and my mother 2 years later. I end my family chronicle, this is now the end of it, with my wedding in 1946. My husband's family came from the same Polish-Jewish environment, and it was a pleasure to see our fathers and mothers liking each other's company. I'm endowing this chair in Polish Jewish studies in my parents' memory, for I'm sure they would like to see some of their monies invested in a subject close to their heart.
On behalf of American Friends of Bar-Ilan University, who were the beneficiaries of your wonderful gift, and we in turn granted it to the university here, we offer a toast in gratitude and also in appreciation of the fact that you were able to enmesh tender recollections amidst a very, very difficult time for the Jewish people. And your endowed gift will permit the students, young Jews, to understand the tremendous legacy of Polish Jewish culture and history, and at the same time have an appreciation of the ability and strength of the Jews to survive and retain that heritage and culture amidst some of the worst times the world has ever known. L'chaim to you.